this virtual meetup. As you can see on the screen, as the committee's all here. So we'll just wait a few more minutes for letting everyone in, and then we'll get cracking. We'll try to keep it as prompt as we can, because we realise people's time is short, and we know everyone's after work, everyone's attention span is even more limited.
How are you doing, Dominic?
Yeah, all good. Yourself?
Yeah, good. Busy, or maybe busy is the wrong word. I'm doing great stuff.
Good stuff. Different than Valtech? Is it different than Valtech?
Yeah, it's different. Yeah. Now I have partners that want to have things.
Okay, so we'll just wait a couple of minutes, and then Bart will be able to start his first presentation. So just for everyone to know, people will be muted during the talk, but you can use the chat facility if you have a question. We'll keep questions sort of to the end of the talks, and we'll see if we can answer some dependent on time. So if you have a question during any of the talks, just pop it in the chat, and if we have time, I'll read some out to Bart and each of the other people that are talking, and when we get to them, we'll see which ones we can fit in. Yeah, that's it.
Much better than a real event, Alex. You don't have to tell everyone where the toilets are and the fire drill.
The fire drill. Yeah, if you don't know where the toilet is, I can't help you. You're in your home. Hopefully you know. Okay, in that case, I'm going to Bart, instead of sharing, he's going to be just using his screen. So I've spotlit Bart, and everyone should hopefully be able to see his screen.
Yeah, so I start. So wait 1 minute.
You can, yeah, or you can wait 30 seconds a minute if you like. It's I think you're free to go ahead if you like.
Yeah. Okay. Welcome everybody. Thanks for having me, and that I can talk about Sitecore on containers and AKS. I'm not going to deep dive very deep inside manifest and all kinds of stuff. I'm roughly going to introduce some stuff on containers and AKS and what it is and how it works, and that gives a bit more understanding why you should switch over to containers. Basically, I want to first have a look on the container-based CI/CD flow. Everybody knows about how you can deploy Sitecore to Azure PaaS and how they have structures, they CI/CD pipeline and everything, and every partner or client did implement something, and roughly all the same. But if you look on the way how you can, how you want to deploy your Sitecore deployment, you have the developer, you working with your IDA, you're writing code, and then you commit your changes to your source control, and at that moment that triggers a build on your CI. This is like the same flow that you have currently if you don't work with containers. This is the flow that everybody knows, and then a lot of things are happening after that step. But the difference with containers is that if the container is built, you're going to push that to a container registry, and that will also trigger some base images. Dus you're pushing that to your container registry, this image that you're building. If a base image will change, it will also trigger the build. Yeah, that is something, but I will explain it a little bit more in detail later. That will trigger your release CD, and then you're deploying your specs to your AKS cluster, and that will pull images for your container registry, and then you can push content to that instance also. I will say something more about that later. And then the users can access your website. If you roughly look on this picture, a lot of elements are the same
But
without containers.
I think we might not be able to see what you're pointing at.
I was just about to say the same thing. We can see black and Sitecore. I just realized you were trying to show a slide.
Wait a second. Wait a second. That was not good idea. Now you're seeing it.
Yes. Yeah. On the front, on your front page.
Sorry. This what I did. I roughly went to this picture.
There we go. All good now.
Yeah. Sorry. Dus somebody is committing, blah blah blah, building CI/CD, and this roughly looks the same as your normal way of working now without containers. But there is one big difference: is that there is a container registry where you push your images, and the images will be pulled to your AKS cluster. Okay, what is a container? A container is a standardized unit of software, and what it is you develop, you ship, and you run everywhere. And this is, I think, the key takeaway also is that if you build a container, it can run in the cloud, it can run on your local machine, it can run on any cloud provider, it can run what you want, it can run everywhere. And that is, I think, the container is a packaged software into standardized units of the development, shipment, and deployment. And this is, I think, the key thing what you're doing. Dus if you build a container, and that's also like if you build code binaries, you're going to ship the binaries to, for example, you do an FTP, or you push them to an Azure web app, you're pushing the code. But if you're going to remove or change state, you also need to remove stuff from that web app, for example, because but if you deploy your container, the container is a desired state. This it's like a file system. Everything what is in the container will be deployed. So if you build a new container, look at like as a file system. A container is a zip file with a file system with files in it. If you deploy a new container, you are deploying a new set of files, or you're going to run that new file system. Why do you need to start using containers now? And that is, I think, I get that question very often. It's like, why do we need to switch over to container? Because I have a way of working. I know how it works. I can deploy. I have my artifacts, and I can deploy to Azure, etc., etc. But I think if you look on the roadmap of containers, it's like it started a long time ago, but the big change did happen in 2013 when Docker introduced a way of working. But containers were also already on Linux for a very long time in different kinds of systems. LXC was one of the important ones, but also CQ crops. But the containers are already there for a very long time. But it did change in 2013 when Docker was doing what was introducing it. Containers are secure. It's like a file system. Everything it's like that they are secure. There are a lot of tools out of there working with containers. And you have a lot of benefits in your CI/CD process. The shipping your containers is very easy. And then looking on that one, I think when Docker started in 2013, 2014, and 2015, something like Windows containers were introduced, I think end 2014. It was not yet so stable on that one. But now if you look on the way where we are now, they are so stable, and you see that every cloud provider is changing the way of working. They are going to work with containers. What's Kubernetes? That's, I think, if you read this statement, this is, I think, the sentence. It's an open source platform, and it can manage containerized workloads. Because what did happen when Docker released their first release, then there was like, hey, why is there not an orchestrator that can handle containers? Now, why do you need to use Kubernetes? That's, I think there are a few statements there that I can mention out. It's like there is service discovery and load balancing in Kubernetes. There's storage orchestration. There's automated rollouts and rollbacks. There's self-healing. Does that means if a container dies or is not healthy anymore, they will restart. And there is secret and configuration management. Looking on Kubernetes, it's also following some best practices. It's also following the 12-factor app. Google on that one. And that's, I think, very interesting to read if you look how you want to build software. It's also open source fully. Now, what is Azure Kubernetes? AKS. It's a managed Kubernetes service. Because Kubernetes runs on Amazon, it runs on Azure, it runs on Alibaba, it runs on Amazon. Now, all the cloud providers have managed Kubernetes services running. If you want to install your own Kubernetes cluster, you can do that. This you can have bare metal hardware where you're going to install your own clusters on. That's possible, but all the cloud providers are taking that. Installing a cluster is not it's like a learning curve that you need to do. But if you want to install your own cluster, that's possible. But then there is a lot of things you need to arrange, and Azure and AKS and other cloud providers are taking that difficulty away. But still, you can still run your own cluster and deploy that if you want. But AKS is a managed Kubernetes service. And as you can see, they have Linux and Windows nodes, so you can run Windows containers, and you can run Linux containers. And the whole infrastructure works on the Azure networking stack. There's all the stuff that is like available on Azure, like the load balancer and other stuff, and you can use a lot of implementation or a lot of services that Azure are offering. You can use that. Do I need to learn Kubernetes? And that's also a good question, because that is also something that I get very often. The question, yeah, but do I need to learn this? And what my answer is, I say no. It is not needed. If you don't want to go in that direction, there are alternatives that you can use. And if you look on, for example, Azure, there are multiple ways how you can deploy your containers. And now, as you can see, Azure, the AKS service is on the top, but you also can deploy containers nowadays on an app service. If you look on the way how Sitecore deploys on Azure PaaS, and that we are providing templates, IRM templates to deploy your stuff onto your Azure. The only change that Sitecore will make is making, that's also announced, that we are not providing from 10.1 and up, we are not providing updated ARM templates. But it's not that. It's like, it's still, you can write your own templates, and you can still, it's the only thing is that Sitecore will not provide the templates anymore. But because we believe more now in containers deployment, but it's not that. You can still deploy in the same way as you were doing it now. But the big advantage now is you can also deploy an app service as a container. Container instances is also very nice, and there is also a big change there. If you work with Docker, you have a Docker Compose manifest, you can deploy a Docker Compose manifest directly to a container instances on Azure. There's no need for, it's like it's the same thing. You are doing Docker Compose and you deploy, and boom, it runs there. And as you can see, there are multiple other solutions available. Now, if you look on the web app, there is just an option now. You can choose, instead that you choose code, you select container, and at that point, your container registry will pop up. You can select your image, and then you can deploy your image to that container registry or to that web app. Yeah, but how does that work with updates, etc., etc.? Then, but my app service is automatically updating my code and something what is running below it. App services will also be recycled by Microsoft when Patch Tuesdays is there. Yeah, if they are updating code, they will be also recycling. That's fast. There is one option available, and I want to mention that in the Azure Container Registry. If base images are updated, that can trigger on the ACR a build, and then that image will be updated with the latest updates, and then it will also recycle the web app. Dus the approach is exactly the same, and that is, I think, very nice. I say no about running. Do you need to run on AKS? This was by Vitaly yesterday or the day before. He had Sitecore running on containers on AKS, dus on Amazon. Dus there is also not a login on Microsoft stack. If clients run on Amazon, they can run also containers on Amazon. Yeah, there was a login on Azure PaaS, on Azure, but now there is no login because containers can run everywhere. Okay, looking on a Kubernetes cluster, there are nodes, and the nodes that is a Linux node or a Windows node, and in that cluster you're going to deploy, and in the node there are running pods, and pods will run one or more containers. If you slice that down, that's what you can see here. You see the node, you see a pod, and a pod can run one or multiple containers. If you look on Sitecore roles, you have a CM role, you have an identity role, you have XConnect role. In the way how Sitecore provides that, you have one pod that runs one container. There's like a pod for CM, a pod for identity server, a pod for XConnect, etc., etc. But you can run multiple containers in a pod. That's what you see here. Just you have a pod and that runs multiple containers. Then you have a deployment. Just if you're going to deploy to Kubernetes, you create a deployment manifest, and that manifest holds what will run in that deployment. Dus you say, okay, I want to deploy an XConnect role, a CM role, etc., etc., and that will be deployed into that pod. Now, the container is the thing what you're going to build on your CI. It holds the application. Just like if you look on the container, you grab the base image from Sitecore for the CM role on your CI stack. Dus in the CM role, everything for that role is included. Dus if you take the CD image, for example, if you take the CD a role. If you take the base image for the CD, there is no need that you need to adjust the configuration for CD configuration. It's like it's already there. It's like a CD container. If you run the CM container, it's already, everything is there configured for you, that it is only CM mode. And that works with the type of the container. In that container, in your CR, you're going to put your output of your build. You're going to put that also on your container. You add a layer, and then you add your application on top of that base image. A service is the way how you can expose the communication out of your pod. Dus that will say the service, dus your endpoint will talk to the service, and then just like the ports that you want to open, you use the service. The service is not the service. Just like if you have a CM pod and an Xconnect pod, they are talking to each other by using the service IP numbers, but the service is not exposed to the outside world. If you want to expose your service to the outside world, it's like you need to then set up an ingress controller, and the ingress controller is like a routing, a firewall between your outside world and the servers. And then you're going to say, okay, I'm going to expose port 443 to the CM pod, and I'm going to expose this port to, but like the communication for example, the communication between the CM container pod and the SQL pod, for example, if you run a non-production, that also that will work through the servers, but it will not the ports are not open automatically to the outside world. Namespaces are very important inside Kubernetes. It's a separation of dus for example, you can have if you have a cluster, you can have a namespace for example, UQA or for your UAT, or you are going to test a pull request based, and you're going to create namespaces based for that specific deployment that you're going to do. Now, what is very important is secrets. Secrets are stored. Dus you're not storing. Dus if you look on your container is very. You're not going to put secrets inside your container, because if you're going to ship that container, you're releasing also your secrets, because it's included. It's not allowed to put tokens or SQL passwords or other connection strings. That will be that will be done by secrets. And if you run on production, you should use a key vault, for example, the Azure Key Vault or the HasCorp Key Vault or other way of vaults where you want to store your secrets. But normally, just like if there is a secret store in Kubernetes, you can secure it with all kinds of rules, with airbag control, that people don't have access to it. But still, it's better in production to put your secrets in a vault. And also, for example, AKS has an implementation that you can easily talk to the Azure Vault, for example, but also other vaults. Content deployment, that is also something very interesting now, what you can do. It's like with the new CLI that we are providing, the new CLI from Sitecore, that you can pull and push content out of environments. Dus if you can imagine that you can put that tool also in your CD delivery, that you can pull, for example, content from your UAT environment, and you want to pull that or push that to a production, or pull content from a production environment and put that in Git again. There are also all kinds of ways how you can handle content now. And in the near future, new releases, we will make that even better for you managing content. Now, how does an automation for deployment looks like? Now, it's like you create a namespace, you are deploying your external specifications, and you need to run some init specifications that like Sitecore provides init containers. Dus if you run a production cluster, you need to initialize your databases. Therefore, we have init containers. Have a look on the Kubernetes documentation on the doc side, where step by step will explain well what step will do. Now, then you're going to deploy your applications. You can patch on IP restrictions if you want, and patch container version. And with the CLI, you can do this install. You can authenticate with the identity server. You can deserialize and publish content. You will probably see in the near future more explanation how you can take that deserialization and publish content into your pipeline. Before I go to the tips and tricks, I want to go roughly to my, let me see, I have 6-7 minutes left, I think. Let me go to show you. Let me show. Okay. This is what I told a few seconds ago about how things look like. What you see here is you see here the namespaces. What I have a cluster here, and you see that I have a SUG UK namespace, and that SUG UK space. If I'm going into that namespace, then you see all my pods running. Dus you see my CED pod, my CM pod, identity server, MS SQL, and this is the Lighthouse demo. The Lighthouse demo is like also available on our public registry now. If you want to play with it, you can do exactly what you see here. And if you go, for example, if you go to the secrets, then you see here all the secrets that are like stored. Dus you see here the admin passwords, for example. If I'm going to look in that password, you see that there is a Sitecore admin password. It's encrypted. It's base 64. You cannot see it. You can edit it if you want. If you use an it's like all the secrets are stored here. If I'm going to the services, what I explained, you see here that all the services have an internal IP number. The CM server will talk to the SQL server by using the internal cluster IP numbers. The numbers are not, the IPs are not exposed to the outside world, but they are communicating by these services. If I'm going to the ingress controller, what I mentioned, then you see here that I'm going to, if I'm looking here, then you see here that I have the SUG UK URL here, and then it's like bound. So the backend is the CD on port 80. Yeah, it's here. You see also, etc., etc. So you are bounding your internal services to the outside world. Now, if you also go look on the nodes, for example, now you see here the nodes. What I mentioned is you see that I have a few Linux nodes and I have a Windows nodes. If I go to the Windows nodes and I'm going, then you see that this, for example, this Xconnect role runs on this node. You see here some other nodes. It's also funny. This is our demo cluster. What you can see, what we are doing at the demo team is I deployed the SUG UK into a namespace, but you see that my colleague JFL is also testing some with JFL, but for example, Alexander in my team is testing a pull request. Dus we are creating pull requests by convention, by numbers. Dus we create, we have a pull request open 2938. We're going to test that pull request, and if that is done, then we destroy this namespace. Now, if you're going to let me go to this one. Let me see. 2 seconds. Okay, dus if I'm going to look here, that I have that website up and running. It runs all there, and I can go into that website oh, it's always if you do something demo, I can log into that site, and then everything works out. But what we did, and that's maybe something that is something nice to share, is like what you can do easily. It's like if I'm going to do here an instance and I do SUG UK and I do number 2, and I'm going to say I'm going to deploy something. Wait a second. And I'm going to deploy something. Now you see that something is waiting here. If I'm going to my terminal now again. And go to namespace. If we wait for a moment. And this maybe also answered the question from Jeremy that he asked me on Twitter. We are using we have a Kubernetes manifest, and we bake that into a Helm chart, Helm template, and the Helm template is also there's every time when we release. Now, what you see here that the SUG UK 2 is coming, and then if you go inside that one, then we are deploying this now into a cluster. Yeah, you see that like we are spinning up a new instance. This will roughly take, for spinning this instance will roughly take, we have an init container that the init container is created by the demo team. You can also look on that one if you look on the repository on the internet. It's initialize stuff that we want to have up and running when the instance is ready. This waiting, now you can see already SMP is running, etc., etc. And if you look, for example, here, if you look on the scribe, you will see it's going to pull the image. It's going to pull the latest image, and when everything is like ready, then I want to mention one last thing, and then I'm ready. This one. If you go to portal to get up Sitecore. It's very important, like what is very important to notice is that if you look on the text that we are providing now in our ACR, if you're going to look for Lighthouse, for example, Lighthouse, you will find Lighthouse images. There's a light, for example, we have a Lighthouse XP module base image here. This has all modules that we need to have on that Lighthouse already installed. To wrap up, I see that I'm out of time, I think. To be explained, there's this repository, and you look on the Docker way of working, is how we build the base images, etc., etc. Everything is there. But I think for Jeremy, and that's something that is something also what is nice, we have a Sitecore demo base, and we have a Helm here, and we have stable, and we have here the platform XP0, and what you can see here, we are deploying the CD init container, etc., etc. You are missing a few containers, but we are using dependency to the XP0, because we have that is like also. going back to the presentation. Wait a second, not that one. Sorry, that one. Yeah, what was the tricks and trips? Very important. Now, don't store secrets in your repository, that's clear. Use namespaces and resource groups to separate your releases or things what you want to do. If you want to plan up your production environment, run Solar Cloud or Redis or SQL into a managed service. That's the preferred recommendation from Sitecore. You can always use other. Automate your content deployments with the CLI tool, and make sure that your cluster is high availability. And this was my talk. I don't know if there are time left for questions.
That was brilliant, Bart. Thank you. We do have a few questions if you've got time for a couple.
Yes, I have.
First one's from Steve, referring to your mention of the app service in Azure. Steve asked, does that mean 10.2 is not going to be tested on PaaS and therefore not supported officially? Yes.
It's to make sure we are not how do you say that? The only thing what we are stopping to deliver is the ARM templates, and an app service can still run as is. And about the testing of Sitecore will test on that, I'm not sure. I can verify that and Twitter something about that or come back on that one.
Okay. Steve says, thank you, looking at his camera. And from Hristo, we have, do you need to have a public DNS name in order to host a Kubernetes setup running and accessible on AKS?
Just the only thing what we are doing on this, like the demo that I showed on the Sitecore demo, for example, we making CNAMEs to the Ingress open IP number that is available. If you deploy your Nginx, your Ingress controller to your Kubernetes cluster, that's very well explained. You get an IP, and the only thing what you need to do is you need to set CNAMEs in your DNS. But you can also use the whole DNS service from Azure. We're also using that one to set our names. I hope that it clarified that one.
Thank you. Oh, we've got another one from Steve. Another tricky one, I think. I think he likes the look of the hosting of the PR builds that you've got,
yeah,
and wondering about any licensing implications.
Yeah, that's a good point, because like on the non-production environment, there is not yet a good answer on that one, because we know that there's like probably what will happen in soon. I cannot say an ETA on that one, that we will change a little bit the statement of the non-production environments, running multiple instances of your software on a non-production environment.
Okay, thank you. One's just come in from Chris. Is there any information on what machine sizes are required for prod environments and how many replicas they can support?
Okay, that's a very interesting question. There are two things there. We will share some numbers there because we are doing a lot of tests at the moment with sharing the numbers. But what you can do, there are two things what you can think about. You can say, okay, I take a big node, and you know that it can handle that traffic. Yeah, you can say, okay, this I'm buying I have a machine that costs me X money per month. But what you also can do, and that's also a big advantage of AKS above Azure PaaS, the auto scaling is working very great. If I'm let me if I may, if you look on my screen now, and that is like how it really is. If I'm going to the deployment, and I go and I have a CD server here, and if I'm going to say I'm going to scale that one to 5 machines, and I'm going to do this now, you see that the number go to 5. And if I'm going to my pods, then you see that the CDs are already spinning up. So Sitecore has the mechanism that it will do the liveness. So if it is ready, they can receive the data already. There's the traffic. Dus you will see that they are spinning up. It goes fast. What you can do to recap, you can have a big node, but you can also take smaller nodes that are cheaper. And if you need to handle the Black Friday tomorrow, or in the US it is today or whatever, I don't know. But if you need to handle the Black Friday, you will spin up a lot of machines, yeah. And if they are not needed anymore, they will be teared down right away. On Azure PaaS, you can not scale a web app because it's like you cannot stop them. Yeah, it's like they're always running. You can only change the tier. On this one, as you can see, I have already now 5 instances running, and that took me now how much time was it? It was like 74, like 60 seconds. They are up and running, yeah. Dus things are going very smooth. Just take smaller nodes is my advice. The only impact for clients is that it is maybe harder to estimate how much cost they have in the hosting. But if you do some testing and you do that on the long term, it's a calculation.
Okay, that's an excellent answer. I have a question just to add on to that. Is it easy to build in some auto scale? So you manually scaled that up. If you were wanting this to react to traffic on the site, to auto scale it? Yeah,
that is very easy. There's like the auto scaling. There's also like this Kubernetes has all kinds of rules based on CPU, traffic, memory, etc., etc. It's very easy to with a few rules you can set it up. And also that's also nice to mention. If you run a non-production cluster, for example, if you remove if there is no traffic or you scale your pods down and the node is not needed, it will scale down to 0 and you're not paying. It's like Microsoft added also like the service. If you're not using, if there's no load for your node, it will scale down the node to 0 and you're not paying. Just like on Azure PaaS, you're always paying for your QA environment. And that is also a big advantage for running on AKS.
Oh, that sounds brilliant. All right, I think we'll take one last question because I know we've run over a little bit. I think this will be a quick one. Hi Bart, you mentioned currently Sitecore has 1 container per pod. Can we have multiple containers in a single pod, or do we need to do that at node level?
No, this what I said. There is like what we do now. We run each role inside 1 pod. But you can run multiple containers. If you want, you can run multiple containers, multiple roles in 1 pod. That is possible. That's up to you. But for scaling, you should maybe consider to have a pod responsibility, for example. But also like inside pods, you can scale, but it's maybe to have the separation of concerns there.
Excellent, thank you. Well, that was a really good talk. I really enjoyed that. Hopefully everyone did. Normally, if this was our live one, everyone would be clapping and you'd be able to hear it. Unfortunately, you just have to imagine that because I'm not going to unmute everyone.
Okay, and if any question, reach out on the Docker channel or on Slack or yeah, I'm happy to answer and help.
Excellent. Okay, thank you very much, Bart. And up next, we have Jeremy. So I'm gonna unmute you, Jeremy.
Awesome.
And spotlight you.
Right, so I can, can I find the magic button then and do that? Is that sharing my screen now?
Yes, yep, that is.
Awesome. Right then, good evening everyone. Thanks for joining me today. As Alex has said, I'm Jeremy Davis. I'm a developer and an architect with Kagul up in Manchester. And I'm going to try and explain a bit about this shiny new acronym, CaaS, Content as a Service. And after all that's gone on in 2020, it kind of seems like a lifetime ago. But if you saw news from Symposium in 2019, you'll have seen Mark Frost's big announcement about how Sitecore were working on a software as a service content management product. And there was quite a lot of fanfare, but to be honest, not a lot of detail. They said they were going to release something in summer 2020. To quote their press release, it will reinvent the entire experience of delivering, building with, and using Sitecore software. And in a thing I think they stole from Microsoft, everyone was super excited about the whole thing. So by now, I think you might be forgiven for thinking that they'd had a bit of a Douglas Adams moment there, because no big SaaS release appeared to happen over the summer. But there were some more concrete announcements at this year's symposium, though I've spoken to a few people who listened to that and found them a bit confusing. So I'm going to try and explain what's going on and why, because I think there's some interesting technology going on here. And I'll talk about three things. I'm going to set the scene with a bit about what happened to this promise of SaaS. I will fill in some detail about what's going on with Content Hub and what Content Hub is for anyone who's new to that. And I will finish off with a bit about how this fits in with the rest of the Sitecore ecosystem. If there are any questions, I will try and keep some time to the end for dealing with those. But I will just dive in because I've got quite a lot of stuff to say. So that SaaS announcement got me thinking a while back about how Sitecore could actually provide the existing CMS as a service. And it seemed like a pretty big challenge, because the way we work with the CMS now isn't really suited to a SaaS product, because we're deploying code on top of it, we're editing config files. If you have to do an installation yourself, it can be a bit messy. And if you've ever done an upgrade, you'll know how much fun a project like that can be. But they were starting to talk about containers. The headless APIs were gaining traction. You could install Horizon as a separate editing user interface. And they had a new CTO who had built a cloud-first product. And that all seemed better aligned towards SaaS. So in my head, it seemed quite hard, but doable maybe, but perhaps not a quick project. But another interesting thing has happened in the CMS market since then, in that the market has shifted a bit. There's now a lot of talk about novel ways of actually delivering websites to users. Newer products in the CMS space are talking about using edge caching services combined with the ability to run code in a serverless model. In fact, there's a collection of ex-Sitecore staff who are working on a product using those sorts of technologies to try and deliver global scale personalized websites. And if you've spoken to your marketing people recently, you will have realized that they're having to move more quickly to chase customers, because 2020 has kind of proved that long lead times for delivering websites with traditional CMS tech are not a great idea. So between the risks and the market change, it seems sensible for Sitecore to have a little change of tack. And that change is twofold. Firstly, they are now talking about CaaS rather than SaaS. It focuses our attention on the content, I think, the thing that the Sitecore ecosystem is supposed to deliver. And to me, that's a better sales message. And they want you to produce content once and then reuse it across all your channels. The old CMS could do this, but you usually ended up with integration work to do, and it doesn't really help manage the process of that content creation. So they kind of wanted to lower those barriers. And secondly, they seem to have realized that all that work to bring the old CMS into SaaS world was going to be quite significant. They don't seem to be discarding that idea though. during the big kind of future roadmap session at this year's symposium, they had this slide discussing hosting options. And manage it yourself here is kind of what we're doing now. The common you run the servers approach, where that's either physical boxes or PaaS or containers. Manage it together is what Sitecore are selling now as their managed services offering. You pay them to do the day-to-day management work for you. But as you can see here, they are still talking about this managed by Sitecore idea, a SaaS offering. At this point, that is just Content Hub, which I'll get to in a minute. But Desta Price did say that they expect to extend this towards the main CMS and their content products in the future. But this time they're not putting any dates on that. So I've mentioned Content Hub a few times now. What is that? Well, back in 2018, Sitecore bought a company called Style Labs, and that got them two things. The first was a new CTO, a guy called Tom DeRidder, and he's built SaaS products, so he has a vision for moving Sitecore towards this. And then secondly was their product, which is a cloud-native tool for managing the production of digital content. The digital asset management bits of it are probably what most people see first, but I think it's important to remember that it does quite a lot more than that. Under the surface, the whole thing is SaaS. It's built on Microsoft's tech stack as well, so that kind of meshes fairly well with Sitecore's existing work. Internally, it's managing kind of content entities and their schemas very similarly to the way Sitecore deals with items and data templates. So those concepts mash. And it also has its own kind of approach to workflow. And it has a UI framework that lets you customize and brand the user interface. And on top of all this kind of core framework, they've built 5 main tools. There's the DAM, the digital asset management bits. They let you upload images in whatever formats you have, and it can generate different sizes and crops and qualities from those files. And your staff can manage approval and rejection processes for those assets. Plus, there's a sort of rights management framework so that your staff can know where and when they're allowed to use particular images. And it can also take the artwork you're creating and publish it out to a CDN for reuse by other systems. There's MRM, or Marketing Resource Management. And this, well, it's kind of a campaign and channel management tool that your staff use to keep track of the process of inventing and managing your campaigns. I tend to think of this a bit like DevOps sprint planning tools, but for marketing stuff. And then thirdly is the content marketing platform, the CMP. When you organize the work that you're going to do in MRM, you then need to go on and kind of create the words and pictures for each of the audience segments you have across your channels. And that's what you do here. But it's quite important to note that this only deals with the schema and the content. It doesn't worry about layout and rendering and site structures and things like that. But we will come back to this aspect of it in a bit. It does also do product content management and kind of web to print stuff, but I'll be honest, I have not looked at those, so I'm going to completely skip over that stuff. So fundamentally here, Content Hub is a set of editing tools that we can use with this CaaS product. MRM and CMP let you plan and create your content, and DAM lets you manage the images that go with it. It's kind of best suited to fragments of content, things you generate many versions of that go across your audiences and your sites. The go-to example Sitecore keep using is recipes. Now, there's not really been anything new here so far. This Content Hub stuff is all things you can do already. What is new is how you get this content out of Content Hub and use it elsewhere. And that's, I think, where this CaaS thing gets quite interesting. And they've got a two-pronged approach going on here. What they're calling their global delivery service is one part of it, plus integrations, particularly with the main Sitecore CMS as the other. And this delivery service was really quite key to the announcements at Symposium. It is a way to publish Jamstack websites from Content Hub. That's sites that use JavaScript for their logic, APIs for dynamic data, and static files for all the rest. And they are served out of a content delivery network. CaaS is aiming kind of a sort of marketing microsites level here. Small, quite focused sites that don't have particularly complex behavior or personalization. So serving them via a CDN means that there's no need for content delivery servers or for you to do any worrying about the scaling of your site for user load. But on the other hand, this is not really a replacement for your main CMS because of that slightly somewhat narrowed scope. It's aimed at marketers, but you do still need developers. As mentioned, Content Hub doesn't address with the look and feel bits of your pages. It's using a static site generator to turn content from CMP into HTML that you can publish. So you still need someone to build the templates that are used by that site generator, plus whatever CSS and JavaScript the website you're publishing needs. And this kind of generation process all gets wired up to Content Hub using some events and API sort of endpoint things, so that when an editor creates and approves content, it can get rendered by the generator and then published out to the CDN to get browsed by users. And it also supports more dynamic site behavior. Content Hub can expose GraphQL endpoints for querying the content that it stores. GraphQL is a web-focused query language I think Facebook built for their sites and apps. It's kind of a bit like SQL in that it lets you pick the set of entities you want to search, specify the set of filters to apply, and then describe the structure you want the data to come back in. So it can be very good for efficient content queries here. And Content Hub is going to provide some magic that allows the queries that you write to the GraphQL endpoints to be handled by this delivery service cache for your published content. Though you can still query Content Hub directly if you want to look at the unpublished data. But what this whole flow is not going to do is give you the full richness of XP's rendering and personalization model. So that is where this idea of integration back to the main CMS comes in. If you want to use Content Hub data on more complex sites, there's an integration path provided. It can pull in data from Content Hub to your Sitecore content tree, where you can use it like any other item. And at a high level, this is a fairly simple process. You can connect the two systems using an add-on that's provided for the Sitecore CMS, and you configure it by telling it what data templates it uses to build this content in Sitecore, and give it some settings so that it knows what stuff to pull out of Content Hub. And then when you let it run, whenever the workflow process in Content Hub updates something in CMP, that data gets copied over to buckets in Sitecore. Right now, this is a fairly simple one-directional integration, but they're talking about fancier integration patterns for future releases of this. But even now, your web editors can get on with using content that you've pulled out of Content Hub in whatever pages you are publishing now. Now, I've not got to JSS yet, and honestly, this is a bit that I'm a bit fuzzy on because I am not a front-end developer. But Sitecore CJSS is fitting in pretty well with this headless and Jamstack world. and they've got a few new things to offer here as well. The first is that they are supporting a new framework for JSS sites that's built on Next.js. This is like one of the shiny new code bases that's evolved out of React, I think. And alongside that new foundation for your JSS sites, they are talking about extending this whole delivery service and caching model over to JSS. The detail's a bit thin on the ground here, but they've made reference to the idea that you will be able to push data from your JSS layout service and your content items into this delivery service cache that I've discussed. So in theory, your rendering hosts can fetch data from that CDN at runtime. And I think the stuff I've seen about this has talked about JSS, but I'm assuming that this is probably going to end up working with the ASP.NET Core rendering as well. So as with the Jamstack approach, this is aimed at helping you reduce the need for content delivery servers in your deployments and to help you scale. And I suppose I should point out that the bit I talked about GraphQL APIs should probably be fairly easy to consume from JSS code as well if you wanted to. So you can kind of imagine a future where maybe your rendering host is serverless or is containerized, as Bart had been discussing. So you don't really have traditional CD servers, but wherever they do run, they're pulling that layout and content straight from this delivery service CDN. I also mentioned earlier that the content you're creating here should really be available in any of your business channels. And at this point, there are two routes that are being discussed to get your data into other systems. The first one is GraphQL. And this is supposed to be the kind of best practice, low effort way for other systems to get at content from Content Hub in a kind of a pull model rather than content being copied over to them. But in situations where you can't use that, you can still fall back to Content Hub's main REST APIs. They cover everything it does, though they are a bit complex to use. And I am expecting that we'll see some announcements before too long about how this kind of integration aspect will get extended towards Content Hub's product management connecting to Sitecore Commerce as well. So there's quite a lot going on here, really. Let me try and kind of sum some of that stuff up. I've talked about how this whole business of CaaS is basically three things. You've got authoring with Content Hub tools. You've got publishing to this new delivery service caching model, both for Jamstack sites that you've published out of Content Hub and JSS that you've published out of Sitecore. And then you've got a set of APIs that you can use for content integrations in various places. Now, you don't need to worry about your traditional Sitecore sites. They are not going away. As I've discussed, you're going to be able to pull in content, and this business around the delivery service will end up more integrated as a, I suppose, optional extra on top of the experience platform. Because Sitecore are talking about these as two parallel product streams, but what they want to do is to try and I quote, do the hard part of the scaling for you so that your deployments are easier. CaaS, works alongside the CMS, basically. So if you're interested in playing with some of this technology, you can start with CMP and its connector now. You can get access to a test Content Hub by signing up on their website with a credit card and paying $10 a day or something to run a small copy of it. But the initial version of this delivery service code is coming in late January, early February next year, apparently. Fingers crossed they hit the deadline this time. So they might be a bit late based on the stuff that I discussed at the beginning of this talk, but it does seem that they are coming up with some ideas that do kind of reinvent the experience of delivering content with Sitecore. So what do you lot make of that?
That was brilliant. Thanks, Jeremy. We do have a question that's just come in from Brian. He says the folks at Uniform are doing excellent work with Jamstack and personalization on the edge. CaaS appears to be the Sitecore long-term approach to this. Would you agree?
It's a statement rather than a question.
Yeah, it did have a question mark.
Yeah. Then I think they. So yeah, this is the way the marketplace is going. That we are probably going to see a number of different kind of competing product streams in this area, and Sitecore are looking at an approach where they can move their legacy stuff towards fitting in with that thing. There will be overlap. I'm sure there's going to be lots of argument about pricing. Give it a couple of weeks and I'm sure Adobe will launch something similar. But the kind of core set of technologies seem to be being used by a number of people at the moment.
I'll just add to that Cambridge has chimed in to say that CaaS doesn't have the personalization or layout information, it's only content, whereas Uniform works with Sitecore kind of as it is.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I don't claim to be an expert in this. I'm just trying to summarize what I've learned. But yeah.
I just thought, because I saw that in the chat, I'd read that out for everyone. There's no other questions. I have one. It's an annoying opinion-based one, though, so it's just so you think, given that you've mentioned this is kind of Sitecore's looking at the market and deciding to have a push in this area, and those Sitecore XP, XMs not going away, do you think there'll be a push for the CMP to sort of be the default sort of source of content, like the recommended approach to put content in there and pull it into Sitecore, or add your other streams, and to sort of get used to that approach, even if you're not necessarily building a Jamstack site?
What they have been saying is that this is two non-competing product streams. They mesh, they have synergy, to put my marketing hat on, but they are not telling you to pick one or the other. It depends, what your use case is, basically. The content, starting from Content Hub makes sense for some problems. Starting from XP makes sense for other problems. So I don't think they're going to try and be prescriptive about this.
Okay. Definitely, if you've got a blog or a recipe site or something like that, that's the ideal fit for CaaS.
If you've got a recipe site, if you want to do recipes, there is definitely a template for that. Yeah.
That's the way forward. Or a couple of other questions. I think these are questions. Stelios asks, within Next.js SDK release, do you think there is still a need for Uniform? When now Next.js is coming in out of the cycle?
Well, yeah, I think there are just the framework is not going to support all the features at this point, I think. And as suggested earlier, there's stuff that people like Uniform are doing that Sitecore's model hasn't got to yet. The stuff around personalization is not a solved problem for Sitecore yet. So yes, I think there are still use cases for both of them.
Yeah, I guess it's similar to, not that Unicorn was a official product, but when Unicorn came out and was free, there were still calls for TDS because they covered similar bases, but they offered different things.
Different approaches, different.
Could provide other features.
Yeah. Different price point.
Yes, very different price point. There's no further questions on that at the moment. Cool. But that was a really good preview of what's to come. All seems pretty exciting.
Right. Well, thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Jeremy. I will unspotlight you so you're not being stared at by everyone anymore. And it's time for our last presentation from Adam. Here we go. I'll unmute you. There you go. I'll spotlight you as well.
That's everyone. I was going to say I'm muted. So. Okay. We'll share my screen, hopefully. Cool. Can you see that okay, Alex?
Sorry, I was muted, but yes, yeah, that's sharing fine.
Okay, perfect. Right. Hello everyone, welcome to my talk on building components in Sitecore 10 using the ASP.NET Rendering SDK. So for those that don't know me, I'm Adam Seabridge. I'm a freelance Sitecore developer and consultant based in the UK. I've been working with Sitecore for about 8 years now, and for the last 3 of those I've been a Sitecore technology MVP. So quick agenda. I want to give you kind of a brief overview of what the .NET Core Rendering SDK is, and then an overview of the Getting Started template, which is what we're going to use to kind of demonstrate the next part of this, which is actually building a sample component in .NET Core. That'll get us up and running quickly. And then I've got a few tips, things that I've kind of found out from experimenting with this. And hopefully at the end, we can have some time for a few questions if anyone has any. So just to give you a bit of a brief overview of the ASP.NET Core Rendering SDK, JSS introduced the layout service, which separated the layout and rendering to provide Sitecore content decoupled. And this allowed rendering of Sitecore pages outside of Sitecore in JSS apps using the front-end SDK framework, so for things like Vue, Angular, React. And the new ASP.NET Core Rendering SDK essentially uses the same services that JSS does. So it effectively uses the layout service. So the .NET Core Rendering SDK provides a number of different features. So I've highlighted these here. We've got the client API for the layout service. That's what interacts with, invokes the layout service. You've got placeholder rendering and field helpers to render fields. You've got mapping for HTTP requests to the layout service, and request binding and response of the response to strongly timed models. And then you've got experience editor and analytics support built in as well. So I'm going to have a go explaining the HTTP request pipeline quickly. This diagram was provided by Nick Russelman from Sitecore, so thanks to Nick for sharing this with me. And it will hopefully give you a bit of an overview of the request pipeline and how it works. So initially, users HTTP request resolves a controller and action, and then the rendering engine middleware runs before controller actions are invoked, and basically makes a resolve that, and then the response. So I think my diagram's gone backwards, 1 second. Okay, and then the response is then returned to the rendering host HTTP context, and then the controller action then begins to render the view, and then the root placeholders are then rendered with tag helpers, and then the models are then bound to the views using tag helpers to render out the fields, and then last but not least, the final response is then returned back to the user. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense, and in the demo now, you should see a little bit more of how that kind of works. So a quick overview of the Getting Started template. I'm going to be using a slightly customized version of the Getting Started template for this demo. So this isn't what you would get exactly out of the box, but I'll point out the differences when we get into the demo. So the Getting Started template is a sample environment provided by Sitecore to try out headless development with ASP.NET and Sitecore containers. So you don't need to use Docker to use the rendering SDK, but this Getting Started template will save quite a lot of time if you want to get up and running quickly with it and experiment with it. So it contains a Docker environment for Sitecore XP, single topology with an ASP.NET rendering host. It also comes with some serialized items for a one-page sample site. And it comes with a Visual Studio solution with 2 projects. You've got a platform project for the CM and a rendering host project as well. A quick note that it doesn't follow Helix principles, as it's designed to keep things simple, but Helix examples are available from doc.sitecore.com at the link at the top of this slide. So there are a few prerequisites. You need .NET Core 3.1 SDK, .NET Framework 4.8 SDK, Visual Studio 2019, Docker for Windows, and you need to make sure you enable Windows containers, and then PowerShell 5.1 as well. And then your key steps are to run the .NET new command, and what that will do is download and install the template. Then you need to run IIS reset stop, because you can't have IIS running at the same time as the getting started template, as it uses some of the same ports. And then you need to run .NET new on the getting started template to create your project. You can call it what you want, but my project is the default, and that's what I've used in my demo as well. And then you follow the steps to set up steps basically to use the init and op PowerShell files. And at the bottom there's a video the fellow MVP Robert Hock has created, which takes you through all the steps of getting the getting started template up and running. So I'm not going to go into it in a great deal more. I think I want to try and focus today on actually showing you how you build a component. So without further ado, I'll jump into the demo. So this starts at the point of effectively having followed all these instructions for using the getting started template. And I've got to the bottom here where I've got all my containers up and running. I've published all my items and so on. So just to show you what this looks like on my machine, I've got my project folder here, and this is where the getting started template has been set up. I pulled this all down, and you can see it contains my Docker containers, my Docker Compose config files, etc., the init and op PowerShell files that I ran to get this all my containers up and running, and then it also contains my Visual Studio solution as well, which we'll look at in a bit more detail. So this is none of this is custom. This all just comes by default with the getting started template. So the next step, well, the first thing I did before I could get Docker up and running, get my containers up and running, is I did an IIS reset stop. So that stops IIS. And then you won't see it in this window because my container is already running, but I did a Docker Compose up in this window. And if I show you Docker Desktop, you can see that all my containers are running. So there's quite a few containers that come with the getting started template. So they're all running and already working. I'll close all those down. And then we can take a look at actually what that looks like in Sitecore. So we've got the content management instance here, and by default it runs on cm.myproject.localhost. And then we also have our rendering host instance. So this is consuming Sitecore content from my content management instance via the layout service, and that's what the Visual Studio project will update when we make changes to it. So this is running the rendering host, and as I say, this isn't what you get by default out of the box. With the getting started template, you get kind of the standard Sitecore banner at the top of the page with a white page. It's kind of fairly basic, so I wanted to create something for this demo that was a little bit more interesting, a little bit more real world. So I've added Bootstrap 4 to this, some custom CSS, created a few components. I've got like a hero component and some content text components here. And yeah, start up a little bit. So the next thing to take a look at probably is the Visual Studio project. So this is a project that I showed you on in my project folder earlier. So there's these two solutions that I talked about earlier. We've got the platform project here, And when this is built and published, it deploys to the CM instance, and that basically just contains some config files for the content management instance. And then the main project is this rendering host project here, which is .NET Core site, and it's structured quite similar to what you'd expect with a standard .NET Core website. We're going to create a new model in the model folder, and same in the views. So when you create views, you need to create them within this, by convention, this Sitecore component folder. And there's already some examples in there of views I've created. And then this is kind of a really important file, the startup file. So this is what wires up the layout service, the routing, and also registers all our components with the rendering engine as well. So we'll come back and take another look at that shortly. Okay, so one other thing to note here is that when we make changes here, we have .NET Watch running, so it will deploy them to the rendering host. That's already configured as part of the getting started template. So you'll see your changes happen pretty quickly. So for this demo, we're going to create what's called a model bound view. So that's a view in Sitecore, rendering Sitecore with a data source, and we'll come back into Visual Studio in a little bit and actually do the Visual Studio side of things in .NET Core. But first step is to go into Sitecore and create a template. So there's nothing special about what you need to do for creating a template. We've got these kind of Helix folders already set up that come with Sitecore 10, and there's my project folder. So I guess that's as Helix as this example gets. And in here, this is where we're going to create our new template. So what we're going to do, we're going to try and create a card component. So it'll look a bit like this from Bootstrap, but without the image. And we're going to add it to our page below the hero here. So we'll create our template.
Adam, I think you might have just unclicked stop sharing because the share is just when you clicked at the top.
Yes. 1 second. Yeah, the button,
there you go, that's back.
The button's irritatingly right in the way. Okay, so we can now create our fields, so it doesn't really matter what the section's called. I'm just going to call it card data. And we're going to add 3 fields. We're going to have a title field, a text field, and we're going to make that a multi-line text field. And then we're also going to have a link field. So I'm going to create that as a general link. Okay, and the next step, well, I guess we can set an icon on that. I'm just using a little plugin called Sitecore Icon Search for that to set my icons quickly. So we've got an icon set. We now need to go and create our rendering. So this is where things start to get a bit different. Follow the same folder structure here. And we need to create ourselves a JSON rendering. So that's the new type that we have. So again, we're going to call this card. And we need to set ourselves a data source location. And we want to pick the template that we just created as well. And then we can set our self icon there again. That was when I play ball and set it, but yeah, you do that. And then the next step is to look at the placeholder settings. So I've already created a placeholder, which is actually on our default index page, the default page that I was showing you before. But it doesn't have anything in it yet, and there's nothing enabled on it. So I've called that my project container, and there's already some other placeholders I've created that have got other renderings in. So just like normal, we're going to create ourselves, we're going to add our card to our placeholder like you would in Sitecore MVC. And then in order for the layout service to recognize this placeholder and any components within it, we I haven't really shown you this yet, but up here is our My Project item, which comes with Getting Started template. These are serialized in to Sitecore when you set this up. And this home page uses a standard kind of layout item in Sitecore. But because we are using the ASP.NET rendering SDK, we need to make sure that the layout service can recognize our placeholders. And this new field on this layout is the layout service placeholders, and that's where we need to add our new placeholder so it can recognize it. And this is something that caught me out, that Nick helped me out with, because the documentation was a little bit unspecific about this. So now that we've got that, the layout service will now be able to return anything we add to that placeholder. So the last step is to go in and actually create a piece of content within our site using our new template. So we're going to create a card, and I'm going to call it demo card. And then we can fill in the fields. And I'm just going to link back to probably the home page item. Save that. Okay, so if I now publish the site, and do smart publish, that's going to publish all my updates. But at the moment, our page doesn't know, the rendering host doesn't know about our actual components. We've only done the Sitecore side of things. So if we try to actually open this in the Experience Editor, and add our card, we can do that. So Experience Editor works with the rendering SDK just as if you were using it in Sitecore MVC. And I can add, my card component to it. That's fine, and pick my data source as you would expect. However, it doesn't know about. You can't really see this very well, but it doesn't know about this card yet because we haven't wired it up in our rendering host. So that's going to be the next step. So I'm just going to save that. And then we're going to jump into Visual Studio and do the bits we need to do in here. So the first step is creating a model. So we're going to add ourselves a model in the models folder. And we're going to call that card model. Okay, and this is where things differ a little bit. So you might be used to using Glass Mapper for Sitecore MVC or other kind of ways of binding your models. So we need to define our our fields here. So we've got, we're going to be using the new layout service client model fields interface here. So we've got a text field for our text field value. And then we're going to do the same thing for our title field. So both multi-line text fields and single-line text fields use this type, but then we need to do a different one for our link field. So we've got what's called a hyperlink field for our link. So we've now set up our model with our 3 fields. And then the next step is to create a view. So as mentioned before, we create these in this folder. So we can put in a new view, and we'll just use an empty one. As I showed you on the Bootstrap site, we're going to create ourselves a card. We're going to use the kind of card markup that the Bootstrap site has. So I've pasted that in here, and this is where we're going to actually map our fields now. So the first thing we need to do is add our model. So we want to add our card model in here, and then we're going to be using the new tag helpers here to actually bind our fields. So there's kind of 2 different ways of doing this. You can use the ASP4 approach. So I'm going to bind my title field and text field in the same way, doing that. And then the other way of doing it is to use the SC link or Sitecore specific field helpers. So if you look at the documentation, I think I've got a link to it in my last slide. You can read up on these tag helpers and the different options. There's ones for images and so on as well. So again, I need to make sure that I bind this to my link field. And by default, it isn't editable either. So if I set that, that means it'll be editable in Experience Editor. Get rid of my link. Okay, so we've now converted our view into a proper model bound view. And then there's one final step here. We need to tell the rendering engine that we'll make it aware of our component. So you'll see down here, there's this add Sitecore rendering engine in the startup class. So we need to add our component in here. So just use this add model bound view, and then we add our model name and then our view name. Okay. And then I'm just going to give that a quick build. So because it uses .NET Watch, it should deploy all these changes automatically. And I should be able to refresh my page. And there's our card. So we can edit those fields just like you would normally in Experience Editor. And if I think I've published all my changes, so this is the published version of the site. If not, then I probably just need to go to Sitecore and republish. So make sure everything's there. There we go. There's the published version showing up. And just to show you how that works behind the scenes a little bit more, we can look at the layout service response with a command. I'll share this in my tip slide shortly, but if we run this command, docker compose logs f rendering, that will actually give us some debugging information, and we can scroll up and you can see the layout service response for your page here. This is my home page, and at the bottom here is my project container, placeholder, and my card. So you can see that's working. So if you have any issues, if you've not configured the layout service correctly, or the settings probably in that layout service placeholder field, you might find that this is empty, for example. Okay, I'm just going to jump back to my slides. So a few tips. Use that command that I just ran if you're having issues, if things aren't working, if you're not sure why, you might have made some typos, you might have just forgotten to do something. It's really useful to try and understand what's happening, and you, as I say, you can see your layout service requests as well in the logs. If you have some issues like I've done when I've been experimenting with this, where the rendering host isn't reflecting your changes for some reason, or there's something going on with the CM, then you can do docker compose restart, and your best bet is to do the rendering CM, the rendering host and the CM together. The reason for that is that Docker can assign a new IP to the when you use an experience editor in the content management instance. So you're best off restarting them both at the same time. Have a read up on the tag helpers so you understand those, and that'll really help you, and you can look at the different approaches to and the different properties available. There is a link there to the Helix examples. So once you've got your head around this getting started template, the Helix examples obviously is the right kind of way to do it, following Helix conventions. And then lastly, just ensure that you've got version 14.1, or I think 15.1 is out now, of that Sitecore ASP.NET and Sitecore layout client, layout service client DLLs, because there was an issue with, I think, the 14.0 and 15.0 releases where Experience Editor didn't work properly. So if you're having issues with Experience Editor, make sure they're updated. Okay, that's it, I think. You can reach me on Twitter, or I'm around on Sitecore Slack most of the time, or you can go old school and send me an email if you want to. If you've got any questions, I'll try and take them. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Alan. That was really good. Nice, smooth demo as well. All went according to plan. Well done on using Docker. You're braver than I am for a demo, but you had it all up and running before the.
Yeah, it would have taken a while otherwise.
Yeah. We do have a question from John. He's asked, do you know how well the .NET Core SDK can handle customization of the JSON response from JSS, the layout service, I guess?
I don't. That's a good question. Yeah, I've not got really into this that much. The current client I'm working with is not on Sitecore 10 yet, so I can't really use it in anger as much as I'd like to. So no, that's not something I know the answer to. I can probably ask Nick. Nick's been really helpful with all of this, so I can probably find that out. Quite like to know that myself as well.
Is there anything, as you've been working, coming up with this presentation and playing around with it, is there anything that you found difficult to do that, you'd be easy in MVC, but it's actually you've struggled with this?
I think it's just getting your head around the concepts, the changes in the architecture, and some of the things you would normally do in MVC. You're kind of probably thinking about things in the wrong way. So I think it's definitely important to have a good understanding of actually how the rendering host works, and how the various bits that I was trying to explain on the diagram in my second or third slide works, because that'll help you kind of understand it. But the logs are really useful. That's kind of the first place to look if you're having issues, I think.
Cool. Oh, cool. Last question's just come in from Stelio. As LMS has just released .NET 5, is the SDK currently outdated, or does it already work on .NET 5?
Well, I actually do know the answer to this, because I saw Nick tweeting about this last week or the week before. So I believe it has been updated to .NET 5 as test. I think Nick did that a couple of weeks back. Like I say, I don't think a new version has been released yet that does support .NET 5. I guess it's they're doing some testing and so on, but I believe it worked pretty well from the initial response that Nick gave on that. So I assume it won't be too long until that's released. So then you can start using it with .NET 5.
Cool, that's good to know it's updated. I really like the look of this. My main question, I did just ask in the chat at the end there, was I'm interested to know about the adoption of rendering hosts. Like JSS took off pretty quickly, I think, and a lot of clients started using it, and it'd be really interesting to see if anyone's doing the same thing with .NET, because I don't know anyone who's using it just yet. Like in an actual build rather than just playing around. So I'm wondering if anyone's actually made the leap.
I guess you've got the on-cycle 10 to start with, which is the first step. But yeah, it'd be good to know of any real-world sites out there, or anyone that's working on one.
Cool. I'm just going to unmute Dom. Thanks again, Adam. That was 3 really good presentations, covering really interesting topics all around, I thought. So Dom, I think we're ready to wrap up.
Yeah, I was going to say for everyone, thank you very much to the speakers, and obviously taking part. Thank you for everyone coming. We're going to send probably like a follow-up email, because one of the things we want to sense check is the time of this meetup. How long should it be? What time should we join the day? Should we have breaks in between, those type of things? So we'll send a survey round for everyone to fill in, and obviously get feedback on today. But it looks and sounds like it's gone very well. I've enjoyed the talks, and other people have the chat still whizzing away, so there's other questions in there. So I know it's really good. Thank you.
It's all about stop it just as everyone gets up and heated in their discussions on Zoom. I thought it was great. Obviously, there's nothing quite as good as like all meeting up together, but this has been really good, and I think it's worked very well. So hopefully we can have more of these, and we'll have to work out how regular those be. But yeah, like Tom says, we can send around a survey and get some feedback on how often people want them and what sort of length, what sort of time of day. I think that'll be great. Yeah, I don't think there's anything else to cover, is there? Cool. Nope. Okay. Well, thanks everyone. Thanks again to Jeremy, Bart, and Adam. That was really good. Thanks everyone for joining, and we hope to see you again sometime soon. Cool. Okay.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks everyone.
Cheers, guys.